Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to do more with less and build a better life, then do we have the Stretch Show for you. Today I'll be talking with Scott Sonenshein, PhD, the Henry Gardner Simmons Professor of Management at Rice University, award-winning researcher, teacher, and consultant at Fortune 500 companies, and the author of a fascinating new read with a philosophy I work on each and every day, Stretch. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about unlocking the power of less and achieving more than you ever imagined. That, plus we'll talk about Sony readers and borders, buzzsaws and chocolates, Mian, Noah, and a sleeping beauty exercise, Silicon Valley versus Ann Arbor and Houston, 16 years as newlyweds, and what in the world Bobo the bear and a toy lion have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Scott. Are you ready to shine?
Thanks so much for having me, and I am.
Excellent, and a mighty woohoo! So before we dive right things, have you always stretched yourself outside of the box?
I haven't, and some of the origins of the book go back to when I was working in Silicon Valley, and I set up this contrast between stretching and chasing. And I was working my first job after college in Washington, D.C. I was a strategy consultant. It was an okay job. It wasn't terribly inspiring, but it was a decent first job. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I got a phone call from a recruiter, and she said, "You should come to Silicon Valley. It's so easy to get rich here. Every week there's a new company IPOing. You come out here and in a couple of years, you'll make it." So I had never really been to California before, so I went mostly for the free trip. And I came back, and 3 weeks later I moved from DC to Silicon Valley. And when I got there, I was in the midst of one of probably the biggest chases we've had in the past couple of decades, where everything was being judged by the inputs. It was about how many stock options I was getting. And on the organizational side, it was how fast can we grow? How many new employees can we hire? I mean, you think about all of the efforts the company went to recruit me. I was no one. I had been working 9 months after college. I mean, it was absolutely bizarre what was out there.
It's fascinating. At the time, I was finishing up grad school. I was getting a dual degree, an MBA and a degree in computers, and I had this dream of e-commerce and bridging the business and the techie side of things. In 2000, the offers were just crazy that were on the table for new graduates. By 2001, they were all gone, and it had reversed. Everybody was losing their jobs left and right. What happened with you, and is it Vividence you were working for at the time?
Yeah, I was working at Vividence, which at the time, I believe there were only 3 companies that were backed by both Sequoia Capital and Kleiner Perkins, which are some of the largest and most respected VC companies out there. I don't remember the third one. The second one was Google. So there was a lot of sense of, we're going to really make it, and you should come out here. And things were going well until, of course, the market started crashing, and these businesses were exposed for what they were, which were namely unsustainable. You had the poster child during that era, Pets.com. If you remember, they spent a couple of $1 million during the Super Bowl to advertise, to drive customers to their website that lost 25 cents for every dollar that they spend. So Vividence ended up petering out. We went through 4 different rounds of layoffs before I left. 50% of companies that were founded in the dot-com era ended up imploding because they were not sustainable. And of course, all of this is going on when something much more significant is happening throughout the country, because September 11th was happening, and we had lost one of our colleagues, Jeremy Glick. He was one of the heroes for Flight 93, and it created this very existential crisis for me, because I had been brought to Silicon Valley under the guise of, well, let's just go strike it rich really fast. And I got out there, and it was exciting for a while. And then that started imploding. The company started going through layoffs, lost a lot of people, jobs lost. And then you had this terrible tragedy happening as well. And I started thinking, well, really, what is my purpose here? What am I doing spending my time? And that inspired me to move to Ann Arbor and start a PhD at the University of Michigan and start researching some of these questions that were really intriguing. I was out in Silicon Valley, which is namely, why are organizations and people with so much, why do they sometimes produce so little? And then vice versa, why is it that people with so little sometimes can end up producing so much?
How were you able to make that switch, to go through this existential dilemma? This was certainly a stretch for you, and say, I'm jumping back into academia. I want to figure out what in the world is going on here, and this is a better path for me in life.
Well, it started with just recognizing that at the end of the day, when I thought about what my goals were, I wasn't really living my goals. I was trying to chase after what I thought was the thing I should be doing. And I think this happens to a lot of people, and that's really the origins of chasing, where our actual goals become displaced and we focus on the wrong goals because we think that's what's socially acceptable. We think that's what we should be doing. It's what everyone else is doing. And when I thought and reflected how I wanted to spend my time, I realized it wasn't trying to make a fast buck by moving out to Silicon Valley. It was to immerse myself in ideas and to let my curiosity lead to where it wanted to. And one of the studies I talk about, Stretch, I think really crystallizes the problems of chasing that I had and that so many people have, and that's the chocolate that you're alluding to. So let me tell you a bit about that study.
Certainly, and then everybody's going to be running out for their Dove chocolate.
Right. Well, but not too much chocolate. That's one of the punchlines, because in this study, participants were divided into two groups. One group were the high earners. These were the really lucky people. They didn't have to work that much for chocolate. Then you had the low earners, and they had to work about 10 times as hard for the same piece of chocolate. The experiment is designed into two phases. The first phase, you work to earn chocolate. The second phase, you get to enjoy eating the chocolate. So it sounds pretty fun. So what's happening is you're listening to some nice leisurely music, and then you've got to work. So you've got to get up, press a button, interrupt that nice leisurely music with the annoying sound of a saw cutting wood. And you had to do that.
I want to pause you there. This is so just so people get an idea. You're listening to beautiful music, and it's sorry, everybody, that just comes in, and that earns you chocolate if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, but you got to do that about 100 times if you're a low earner and about 10 times if you're a high earner. So you're going to be pressing that button and listening to that annoying saw sound many, many times. So, of course, what happens is everyone in the experiment over-earns their chocolate, because by the time it comes to the consumption, they end up realizing they worked way harder than they needed to work, because there's only so much chocolate even the most delicious chocolate could be, and the most efficient the most enjoyable chocolate lover can actually eat. So everyone had way more chocolate than they cared to eat. So then in the next phase, the researcher said, well, is there a way that we can get people to better align their goals, which is getting enough chocolate that they care to eat, or maybe they can physically eat, with the amount of work that they're doing? And so what the researchers did is they put a cap on the amount of chocolate that the participants can earn. And those participants with the cap better calibrated between the amount of chocolate they earn and what they care to eat. But here's the most interesting part of the study to me. When you look at people's satisfaction, both while working and while enjoying the chocolate, they were much happier when they actually were earning less chocolate, because they had better calibrated their goals with what they actually ended up working for. And that, to me, was really a metaphor about what was happening in Silicon Valley. Is you go out there and you try and dream of thinking you want to make millions and millions of dollars, but you never think, how am I actually going to use this money? What am I actually trying to do? What am I trying to accomplish? How do I want to spend my time? When we think about what our goals are, we tend to get out of this game of chasing and mindlessly accumulating things just because we think we need them.
Thank you. And though it jumps ahead and it takes on a different philosophy or a different topic that you're teaching, it strikes me that when you're up on the podium getting the silver medal, as researchers found, these people are disappointed when getting silver medals at the Olympics. It has to do with a chasing that is maybe not necessary to find a level of happiness.
Right. So the study you're talking about looks at why silver medalists tend to be less satisfied than bronze medalists. Because objectively, you think the silver medalist did better than the bronze medalist. They should be happier. But it's what psychologists call social comparisons. And this is one of the main engines of chasing. We make comparisons, and our well-being is a function of who those comparisons are. So silver medalists aren't appreciative that, hey, I just won a medal, I just performed really well. They look up and say, well, I came so close to getting the gold. Well, what a disappointment. I didn't come in first place. Meanwhile, the bronze medalists are ecstatic. Hey, I got a medal. This is terrific. I'm in the Olympics. I like to think of the metaphor of we're on the treadmill. And what happens with chasing is we're on the treadmill. We're trying to run. We've got to work. We've got to use energy to stay on that treadmill. And what happens is as soon as we attain a level of resource, we look around and say, well, what do other people have? Well, they have even more than what we have right now. So we turn up the dial on that treadmill. and then we have to run even faster. But we're not making any more progress on our goals. We're still running in place. And we keep turning up that dial until eventually we fall off because we can't keep up with the pace. And that's the danger of social comparison. It's why people who might be multimillionaires are unsatisfied, because they look up and they say, well, how about the billionaires out there? And there's someone in the book who I profile who feels in that position. He founded a very successful company. He made a lot of money. But compared to someone who made even more money and had a more quote-unquote successful company, he thinks he's not doing well.
It's interesting because you talk about, and there are studies about social media in particular, and how the more you look at social media, even if you're doing well, you feel worse about your life.
Right, and that's because we only share, or we tend to share, our gold medal performances on social media, never our epic failures. 75% of the news we share on Facebook is positive news. Well, that's a pretty high proportion, and when you start reading that, you think in your mind, well, maybe I'm not doing so well. What else should I be doing? Because no one wants to share the more mundane aspects of their lives. Hey, I just got an oil change, or I went to a checkup, or even their failures on social media.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's go from there. Let's go talk about a tale of two beers for a minute and what we can learn from sneaker-wearing billionaire Dick.
Okay, so Dick Yingling is not the founder, he's a family business, and it's a beer company called Yingling & Sons, and those of you who are in one of his 17 or so markets might be very familiar with his beer, because it turns out he's the largest domestic producer. And what happened is, when he took over the business from his ailing father, there was quite a shakeup in the beer business. At the time, mega conglomerates like Anheuser-Busch were buying up lots of small brewers, and Yingling was a small brewer, and those brewers either sold out to large companies or they ended up folding because the economics just weren't making sense. And I profile Yingling along with another beer company in Detroit, Michigan that was called Stroh's. And they were very similar positions at the time. Stroh's decided to take more of the chasing mentality, and they said, you know what, we can't make this work with our size. So what we need to do is we need to go and buy other companies. And they spent hundreds of millions of dollars, went into deep debt trying to buy lots of other beer producers. Then they spent a ton of money trying to replicate the advertising companies of the multi-billion-dollar beer giants, thinking they needed those same type of advertising techniques to make their business work. Meanwhile, Dick Yingling is trying to build a business based off of stretching. He wears sneakers, he reuses styrofoam coffee cups, he was driving a beat-up Ford Taurus at the time, and he said, look, we don't need to grow really fast because that's not part of my life. For him, that would be about over-earning all of that chocolate. I want to create a family business that's going to be successful, but we don't need to hit a home run right away. So I'm going to limit the number of markets I distribute my beer into. And so he focused on a few markets, but tried to do those markets well. Well, of course, what happened is, because everyone loved his beer, they said, come to my market. So that's free advertising. It creates this nice buzz, lots of viral buzz about his company. Meanwhile, he's also instilling a very judicious culture. Why are we having to mail out bills to our customers when we're dropping off beer every day? What a waste of a stamp. Now, that's not a lot of money, but you think about what it does in terms of building a culture of stewardship. And so he did little things like that. And eventually, when Stroh's went belly up because it couldn't pay off its debt and they had to liquidate many of their assets, he swooped in and bought a lot of their factories and their equipment for pennies on the dollar. And he grew into the largest domestic beer producer in this country by following stretching. Well, Stroh's, which was larger and more successful at the time, ended up going belly up by chasing.
So thank you for sharing on that. Before we got on air, I mentioned real briefly about our story. I'll give the 10-second version right here because we fall into this category. We got years ago a whopping big deal from Random House for a couple book deal. It was fantastic. And we started, not stretching, but maybe chasing. We started, let's build out our website. Let's build this, not just how-to DVD. Let's make this incredible DVD. Let's make this incredible book tour. And we said, for instance, you talk about in the book, there are those who want to put a nail in the wall and they try to find any way to do it. There are others who say, I need to buy a better hammer first. We were trying to buy a better hammer, and we basically went belly up from it. Second time around, we've started this show here. It's worldwide. It's gone gazunga. It's top 10 in all these different markets, and we've built it on nothing, absolutely nothing, and had to scrape to get by and watching it grow slowly. We'd love it to grow faster, but it reminds me of Dick and slow and steady truly winning the race.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's one is my guess too is you're also a lot happier using that stretching technique than the chasing technique. But beyond that, the brain works very differently when it faces constraints versus when it faces abundance. When we face abundance, we think we always need the perfect tool. So you've got to go find that best hammer or the shiny DVD. We don't think more resourcefully. When we face scarcity, we just get the job done, and the brain actually can expand its creativity and think about using resources in untraditional ways. You don't need the hammer. You don't need to spend the time looking for the hammer. You don't need to spend the money going to buy the hammer. You just grab your shoe because you're wearing it, and it gets the job done just as competently, and perhaps even more importantly, faster, because you're not waiting for that perfect tool. You just get the job done right away, right now.
I love it. I love the concept of what can I do with what I have rather than the pining for if only I had this, or I can't do it until I get this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah, because there's so many times where we delay our actions. This happens in our personal lives too, and we think, well, if I only had more money, I could go do this, or if I had more time, or if I had more information. But in many cases, having less serves us better because of this effect that we get on how we can creatively work with what we already have. So don't get me wrong. I mean, you need some resources, and a lot of the research shows that it's what we would call an inverted U effect, where having nothing is going to be harmful. But also what's interesting for people is having abundance and having too much is just as harmful. So we want to find that sweet spot where we find ourselves under moderate conditions of constraints that allow us to work more creatively with what we do have.
There was a guest we had on recently. I won't get her name at the moment, but she was talking about living not below your means, but well below your means. And I think that level of constraint helps us. Maybe you can talk briefly about, I was really excited about him, Van Man.
Yeah, so Van Man is Daniel Norris, and he's a professional baseball player. He's a really fascinating person because when he was drafted, he received a $1 million plus signing bonus, and lots of, I guess, the ritual in baseball, and this probably goes for a lot of sports, is what's the first thing you do? You go shopping. So he goes shopping, and I think he's a little off-put by what his teammates are doing. He buys a Converse t-shirt for like $10 or something on sale, and everyone else buying expensive sports equipment and stuff, because he thinks, well, my life goal has nothing to do with making and spending a lot of money. It's about playing baseball. And in fact, how am I going to get into this mindset so I can be really successful as a baseball player? I'm going to go live in a van. And I think his coach and his teammates were really off-put by this, because not only should he not be driving a van, he should be driving a Lexus SUV sports car, but he should be living in a really fancy house because that's what sports stars are supposed to do. But for him, he found a lot of peace and solitude in the band because it allowed him to focus on what was most meaningful to him, which again wasn't earning and making a lot of money. It was playing baseball to the highest level possible. And he found that's the way that he was able to put himself in that mindset. Now, my advice isn't for everyone, go live in a van. I think that was a very personal choice for him. But the advice is, figure out what it is that your most meaningful goals are and put yourself in situations and contexts that allow you to go reach those goals.
And there's something, because we know a lot of sports stars who've hit the top and then hit the bottom or beyond. Yeah. They've reset what the bottom is. This freed him up to play, not worry about those things. And then there's a level of, well, it's not a burden, because whatever he's doing, it's just for the love of the game. He's not trying to maintain an unsustainable way of living.
Yeah, that's right. And we get into that problem when we're chasing because we might end up taking on a lot more debt than we realize to keep up with the Joneses. Or if you're a company, you also end up taking on a lot of debt, or maybe you're beholden to investors. There's someone by the name of Alex Turnbull who runs a software company called Groove. And he was in a position that I think a lot of entrepreneurs would envy, because investors were offering him multi-million-dollar checks to invest in his company. And he thought about it, and he realized that to live the type of life he wanted to live and to build the business he wanted to live didn't depend on taking this money. But taking this money changed some of the choices he did have to make. Not just work-life balance, where he'd feel he'd have to work a lot longer and couldn't do some of his hobbies, but he'd also have to build a business that needed to try and make a home run, where he didn't want to hit a home run. He wanted to create a successful business that provided a substantial amount of income, but he didn't want to try and hit that home run and most likely strike out. he wanted to build something that was sustainable, that can provide him with meaningful work and a sizable income for the rest of his life, not try and hit this home run.
Couldn't agree more. So let's talk briefly about functional fixedness, and maybe we can talk about Bobo the bear and a toy lion.
Right. So functional fixedness is the idea that we tend to use resources to their most conventional way. We look around and we see an object for what it appears on the surface. So again, we go back to the hammer example. The hammer is the way to get nails into the wall. Now, it turns out that what research shows is children are some of the most resourceful people out there. It's what I like to call the frying pan test. You give a toddler a frying pan, it's an instrument, it's a container, it's a stool to reach something. On a bad day, maybe it's a toy to hit your brother with or something. Hopefully not, though. Right?
A light frying pan.
A light frying pan. The challenge is, as children grow up, they become socialized through school. And this goes for adults, too. You take your first job. What's the first thing you do when you work? You get trained, you get socialized, you get taught to think a specific way. Children, too. Hey, a frying pan is not for all of these activities. A frying pan is what you make a stir fry in, right? So the Bobo the Bear study basically had children look at a number of different objects, and they said, hey, Bobo's got a problem here. Bobo can't reach his toy. Can you help Bobo reach the toy? And they had a lot of objects, and one of the objects was a box that you put the other objects in. And in this experiment, you would expect older kids who have higher degrees of cognition to be able to solve this type of complex problem better than younger kids. And in fact, in most of the conditions, that's what happened. The older kids were able to realize that you can take the box, you can prop Bobo up on the box, and then he can actually reach his toy. But there's one condition in which the younger children outperform the older children, and it had nothing to do with those children being more gifted or smarter or their upbringing, their personality. What it had to do with was how the box was actually displayed. When the box was displayed as a container and you put the other objects inside that box, for younger children who hadn't been socialized to think about boxes in very specific ways, it was still that same object. And they were able to say, hey, it's not just a container, it's a step stool. But for older children who that box was socialized to be a box, and once you made that cue and said, hey, it's a container to put this other objects in it, those older children struggle to see the box as anything but the container, and they underperformed the younger children, even though their cognitions were much more developed.
It's interesting because I can see how you would even look at that box as an older child and go, oh, I'm not supposed to have anybody step on that or have Bobo step on that. That's a box. You don't step on boxes. It's the rule. There's a rule that seems to be set up in their mind that says, no, don't do that.
Yeah, and these rules are what we call socialization, and what we don't realize is we are squashing the resourcefulness, the creativity, and the stretching out of our children by teaching them that there are specific ways of using resources, when the reality is most resources have so much versatility in them.
Let's go from there. Let's talk briefly about your wife, Randy, and the Sony Reader.
So my wife is in the retail business, and one of the things she used to do was run a group of products for Borders, who of course unfortunately went bankrupt. And Borders, she was at Borders at the time when online stores were just starting up, and there was this company called Amazon, and who knew what they were, but they wanted to sell books online. And she was at Borders at the time, and the executive team said, well, we're really good at selling books physically. That's how we view book selling. Someone comes into our store and they leave with a nice, shiny hardback or softcover book, and that's what we do. And this company, Amazon, well, they're really good at website stuff. We don't do any of that. So let's send our website to direct all of our business to Amazon. We'll let them handle that because, that's not really well. Is right. Jeff Bezos sent a whole case of champagne after they inked that deal. Yeah, exactly, because he knew what was up, and of course, Amazon ended up taking all of or most of Borders' customers, and Borders folded. And Randy then had an opportunity to try and restart this business with the Sony Reader, because before there was the iPad, before there was the Kindle, there was the Sony Reader, and she had helped negotiate an exclusive agreement where Borders would have the first dibs at releasing the Sony Reader before any other company did. And, the problem was there was very tepid support for it because, again, why are we on this e-reader thing. People don't read books on screens. They read books in paper. And this is just a waste of our time because that's not what bookselling is. They were the epitome of functional fixedness because they only saw books as physical things that you hold with bounded pages. And as a result, the Sony e-reader launch kind of fizzled out, and then what did you have in the years coming? You had the Kindle, and then you had the iPad, and now a lot of people get their books that way, and that was another missed opportunity for Borders.
So let's go from there. Thanks for sharing on that. And let's talk about all things rich and beautiful and the power of frugality.
So we tend to think of frugality as maybe not such a good thing sometimes. And I think the problem is we conflate two very distinct psychological states. Frugality is different than cheapness. So cheapness, we are psychologically paying from spending money. And that's not the ticket to a satisfying life or even a successful business. That means we're not going to engage in an indulgence when it would bring us great pleasure. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or in terms of you're building a business, you're not going to invest in necessary resources to make it grow. So that's not good. But frugality is something very different. Frugality is this pleasure we get from using resources wisely. So it's this high that we get from knowing we were efficient with our time or we got a good deal on something. And when we're frugal, we tend to be in that stretching mindset and we get the most out of our resources.
So maybe you can share with us about Jenny Dawson and expired food.
Yeah, so one of the things that I love about Jenny Dawson is she created this company called Rubies in the Rubble, and it's kind of a play on diamonds in the rough. And it's the notion that when we're stretching, we look at what other people consider wasteful resources. And in her case, she visited this very well-known market in London, and they have great produce. And she was really horrified at what she saw, because what she saw was a dumpster full of perfectly edible food. The challenge is we throw out so much good food in this country and around the world because it looks a little funny. It might have a small indentation in it, or it might be slightly discolored, but it's just as nutritious and it's just as tasty. So she said, I'm going to take all this stuff headed for the dumpster and I'm going to turn it into gourmet food. And she built an entire business on making chutneys out of food that was headed for the dumpster. So she took what was trash and literally turned it into treasure. And it became this tasty food that's now distributed in over 100 places in the UK.
Awesome, awesome. How do we start to get ourselves into that stretch mindset? You say stretchers find beauty and richness in places where others struggle to see anything of value. How do we start to get to that stretcher place?
Well, we first have to appreciate what's around us, because the challenge when we're chasing is we don't appreciate what's around us. We think we need what's not around us. And if we take stock of what's around us, we can start to begin to work with it and realize what we have. So one of my favorite examples from the book is from the filmmaker Robert Rodriguez. And he was known for making, my kids know him for the Spy Kids trilogy, but his first film was a film by the name of El Mariachi.
And he paid for that movie with blood, from what I understand.
Yeah, literally with blood. And I'll get there in a second, because he was starting out like a lot of us when we begin our careers. He didn't have a lot. He didn't know a lot about filmmaking, didn't have much experience. He didn't have a lot of money. He didn't have a lot of connections. And he realized, if I try and make a movie just like they do in Hollywood, I'll come up short. I can't match their resources. But let me ask and take stock of what I do have. Well, what he did have is he had a friend who had a ranch. He said, I can shoot there. He met some people who he thought might make good actors. So he said, let me have you act in the film. And then the blood example, well, he didn't need a lot of money, but he needed some money to make his film. So he donated himself to the cause of medical research, and he spent time getting poked and pricked and, for the benefit of science. I think he was actually working on the drug Lipitor, if I remember correctly. And he confined himself, but he made some money. He made about $7,000, which was enough for him to make the movie. And I should point out that at the time, just a trailer, think a 30-second trailer, would cost maybe about $20,000. He made his entire movie for about $7,000 by working with the friends who could act, the ranch. He didn't have expensive props, so he took some condoms and stuck some red paint in there for blood. Didn't have the fancy dollies. He used wheelchairs to move the cameras. He made this critically acclaimed film that was sold for over $1 million to Columbia Pictures. And even as he's progressed in his career in Spy Kids, that's a relatively big budget film, but he estimates he made it for about a third of what anyone else would by following the same formula of working what he has and not chasing what he doesn't have. And he also points out he's probably the happiest producer in Hollywood because he's not beholden to having these $100 million blockbuster films. I mean, some of his films have certainly made that amount of money in the box office, but he doesn't have to pay off these investors because he makes these movies so much cheaper with much more frugality than most other people.
Awesome. And that is a mighty woohoo!
It sure is.
From there, staying on the movie theme and viewing things from completely outside of the box, from an outsider's perspective, what can we learn about Napoleon Dynamite and a guy in a garage?
So it's a great question because, look, in our society, we tend to think that those who know the most contribute the most. It's another aspect of chasing. So you form a team at work, or you want to go ask the person who knows the most. And in some cases, that's really good. So I've got some people, students, they're trying to get out of class probably. They come to my office and they say, Dr. Sonenshein, I'm not feeling well. I say, go see a real doctor. I'm not that kind of doctor. And until you do, get your butt into class. So there's a reason for experts, but there's also a reason to ask outsiders, those that don't know a lot. And the Napoleon example you're talking about was, look, what's one of the staples of the French diet? It's butter. Well, as times were tough and you had a lot of people moving from rural areas to the city, butter was becoming more and more expensive. Well, that's an outrage to the French population. So Napoleon said, well, I don't know how to solve this problem. Let me ask a bunch of outsiders. And he had one of the very first what we call innovation contests, where before there was Kickstarter and all these other companies, he crowdsourced his idea and said, who can come up with the best idea, the best substitute for butter? And he asked a whole bunch of people, and it turns out that the same society that loves its French pastries and its croissants also gave us margarine. So I don't think they're terribly proud of that, but margarine was the inexpensive substitute to butter. Well, you had other companies start to do this, and they realized that they might have really good experts, but by asking outsiders and those who don't know a lot about the problem, they might get some good ideas. So just a guy in the garage, his name is Gavin Potter, and he lives in London, and the company Netflix had a very big problem on their hands. They wanted to fine-tune their very fancy algorithm that recommended movies, and their experts couldn't come up with the best way to do this. So they said, let's ask a bunch of outsiders. So they created this prize. It was the Netflix prize, and it had a very big bounty. I think it was about $1 million prize, and you had thousands of people from all over the world entering this contest. They were MIT-trained scientists. They were from NASA. They were from all these amazing places. And then you had Gavin Potter, who is in this flat in London with his, I think, 3-year-old Dell desktop computer and his teenage daughter, Emily, who is helping him with some of the math. And as all of these experts were trying to come up with how to solve the problem as let's fine-tune this mathematical algorithm, Gavin Potter had an idea, and he said, you know what? This isn't a math problem. This is a human behavior problem. And he remembered when he was back in Oxford, he studied psychology. He remembered about some of the classic studies in behavioral economics by Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, and one of those studies was on the concept of anchoring and how we often base our predictions on useless information that happens to be in front of us. And Potter realized, well, you know what? This Netflix problem is just like that, because the movie that you happen to see or rate before the one that you're currently rating you. So if you like that movie more, you're going to like this next movie more just because you like the movie in front of it more, and so on. And as he introduced this idea into the Netflix prize, other teams started using it, and that helped solve and crack the problem that took almost 2 years to solve.
Wow. So let's go from there, from being an outsider. Let's go back to Robert Rodriguez a minute and talk about the concept of it's time to act and taking that time to act now rather than when everything is perfectly lined up.
Because, of course, things are really never perfectly lined up. We might think they are in our minds, but the problem is we wait. We wait for them to be perfectly lined up. So one of the principles in Stretch that I talk about is the importance of acting and not planning. And again, there are things in your life that you're going to want to plan. You're probably going to want to plan for retirement. You're going to want to plan for your kids' education. But we overplan. And the challenge is when we overplan, we trick ourselves into thinking that what we plan for is the reality that we actually face. But the reality actually is things are always changing so fast that it becomes really hard to plan. I mean, companies that plan 5 years down the road tend not to have a performance impact from those strategic plans than those that don't. Same thing in our lives. How can we even think about what the world's going to look like in 5 years or 1 year or even a year or even in this half hour that we've been talking already? I haven't been checking Twitter. Who knows what's happened to the world on with Twitter? So this is the idea, is instead of waiting for the ideal tool, which gets us into the excuse, if I just had a little more, if I had more time, if I had more money, more information, I can do it. We start acting and we learn about the present. We think about our lives as lots of little experiments. And as we're experimenting, we learn more about ourselves. We learn more about the situations that we're facing. As we pick up this information, we can make lots of different adjustments. So one of my favorite stories in the book is this guy who was kind of had his back against the wall. He was an advertising executive, and he was in a makeshift office. He didn't have a lot of time. One of his clients was pressing him and said, come up with a way of unifying all of our media campaigns. And from his office that didn't even have a phone, they had cell phones back then, so he had a payphone out of all things. He thought about this guy who was a really bad person. His name was Gary Gilmore, and he was a lifelong criminal. And he realized that a very unusual connection, because unlike most people on death row, when this guy was sentenced to death, this guy wanted to die. And his last words at the death chamber were this: it was, let's do it. Well, that gave Dan Wyden, this advertising executive, enough inspiration to complete his work, because he came up with, of course, what we'd argue is probably the 3 most valuable words in American English. Just do it. Nike's slogan that launched this multi-billion-dollar brand. And that slogan not only was created out of nothing, but it teaches us to act right now. Don't wait for tomorrow. Act with what we do have. Make things happen. And when we make things happen, that's when we can get outcomes. Our successes aren't based off of what we plan to do. They're based off of what we actually do, and we tend to forget that.
There's even, when you said that, the thought that came into my mind is our successes aren't even planned on what we do. They're often planned on our successes come out of our failures. Taking that action, making a quote mistake, and learning from it allows us to make another step. We're so afraid, seized in fear of making a mistake, that we overplan, and then it's death by no action.
Right, and planning becomes that safe thing that we hold on to, where it makes us feel better because it increases certainty, because we make assumptions in our plan and then we hold on to it. And then when we fail, we say, well, we had a good plan. Here's my get out of jail card. But no, you got to be judged by your actions. And if we can get more comfortable acting, we get more relevant information that allows us to adjust our actions and be a lot more effective.
Woohoo! Let's go from there. Let's talk about we are what we expect, and maybe you can tell us the power of positive prophecies.
Well, I've got to unfortunately start with negative prophecies, because I'll tell you, 5th grade was a really hard time for me. I had this teacher, and she was absolutely terrible, and I had awful penmanship. So I'm not going to deny that my penmanship was absolutely terrible. And anyone who's seen me sign their book of stretch knows that's an absolutely true story. Because
I've got to pause you there. When I sign a book, I get nauseous, I twist inside, and I worry if I'm going to ruin their book, because there's been times where I've taken the book back and go, I can't. Here's another one. I get it.
Yeah, so I'm totally safe. I'm just there with you, and I'm a lefty, so it makes it that much harder. And of course, we had these erasable pens at the time, which you would just smear the ink. So my teacher, she gave me an F. It's the only F I've ever gotten in my academic career. She gave me an F the first 3 quarters and told me I would never amount to anything because I had awful penmanship. Then the 4th quarter, she didn't give me a grade. I was so excited on my report card. I'm like, I must have improved. And she told me, actually, no, that's not, quite the contrary. Your penmanship is so bad, you're not worthy of the F. So that was really devastating. And again, she was telling the story that I just couldn't succeed in math or reading or anything else because my horrible penmanship. And of course, I bring the report card home. My parents are first really excited because they're like, wow, you didn't fail penmanship. I didn't really want to tell them the whole backstory, that I wasn't even worthy of the F. And this is our challenge. She put the dunce cap on me, metaphorically. She set really low expectations for me. And we do this all of the time. We might hear about someone who's a jerk, our neighbor, or a new colleague, before we even meet them. How do we interact with them? We interact with them in ways that turn them into that jerk. It's that self-fulfilling prophecy. So one of the techniques of stretchers is to replace that dunce cap and put on a competence cap and expect the best out of people. But that's hard because we don't have access to situational knowledge, and we make what psychologists call attribution errors. So here's a simple example. Think about when you might be late to work, or maybe your spouse comes home late. What's the first thing that you think? You think, oh, they should have left earlier, they're not responsible, or in the employee's case, maybe they're out late partying the night before. Now, you're late to work, or you're late picking up your kids or something. Well, maybe there's a really bad traffic jam. So it's this asymmetry in situational knowledge. And when we observe someone doing something bad, we immediately think it's the person, not the situation. But when we do something bad, we immediately think it's the situation, not the person. And of course, that's reversed. So you have something successful, you won an award, or you came in first place in something. Well, you think, well, it's the person. I worked really hard, or I'm really skilled, I'm intelligent, I'm athletic, whatever that might be. You observe someone else's successes. It's the situation now. They got lucky. They had a connection. Something unfair happened. And because of these attribution errors, we have a tendency to put the dunce cap on people, not the competence cap. So if we can become aware of these attributional errors and recognize we don't have access to people's situations, give them the benefit of the doubt, set these high expectations as long as they're credible, what research shows is we can do everything from make our kids smarter to employees more effective and productive by doing that.
I would say it becomes a kinder and more compassionate world as well.
Yeah, it certainly does.
You tend to lay or stay off of the horn rather than lay on the horn when you realize that person may be having an emergency, something terrible may be going wrong, anything of the sort, because you don't know, you're not in their shoes.
That's right. Absolutely.
So let's talk about mixing things up and maybe deviations in getting your daughter ready for school.
So mixing things up is the concept in stretch where you put two things together that you ordinarily wouldn't put together. So I did a whole bunch of research with gourmet food trucks, and that was absolutely fun to do because I love to eat, and I actually gained 15 pounds doing this research, which I had to work really hard to get off.
So you saw the movie Chef then?
Yes. Very, very good movie. And you had the great food truck race. You had all of these things. So everyone wanted to do a food truck. But these are some of the most resource-constrained organizations out there. They're working 18-hour days. They're in metal boxes that can get to 130 degrees in there. It's really, really hot. And fewer cooking equipment, not a lot of experience, and of course less money. That's why they're starting a food truck. It takes 5 to 10 times less the amount of money to start a food truck. So with unthinkable combinations and we mix things up, we realize we can put things together in ways that normally don't go together. So what they did is, despite competing for resources like customers and parking spots, they're also friends, and they do remarkable things to help each other. Your food truck breaks down, your food truck friend brings it to you. You're a pizza truck, you run out of mozzarella cheese. That's a big problem, right? One of your food truck friends brings you mozzarella cheese. You're a dessert truck, you're selling next to another dessert truck. You run out of cupcake wrappers. Can I borrow some cupcake wrappers? Absolutely. So you had this remarkable set of friendships that developed alongside competition, and that's one unthinkable combination. Well, we can mix up things in our other aspects of our lives, and this is about realizing that we get set into routines, and if we mix up our routines, we can accomplish great things. So when I get my daughter ready for school, well, what happens when I lack the ideal resource? I don't have the role that she really likes. Well, you mix things up, and let's just try and put some bread together, and you put it with the sandwich. Well, it changes the routine, but it also might introduce her to learning something new and different, and it turns out maybe she does like that sandwich. So my advice is when we start scrambling up our routines, we can start to make connections in places we didn't otherwise realize. So try running your Monday meeting, as sacrilegious as this sounds, on a Tuesday. The world is not going to come apart. And in fact, you might realize that it changes the dynamics. Or walk to work instead of driving to work. Or drive to work in a different way. Or come to work at a different time. Maybe you'll run into different people. It's all about trying to create new experiences that help us see the world in different ways.
It really sounds like you want to get as far out of your own shoes and your own experiences as you possibly can to really shake up the brain and the synapses.
Yeah, and that even starts with children. So instead of taking them to the toy store, you know where I take my kids? Maybe you think I'm a bad parent, but I take them to the hardware store. And
Oh,
not only do they
cool.
have a blast in the hardware store, they love playing with all the things, and they start imagining things, whether it be like, what is their house going to look like? Or what can you actually do with a hammer? Or what is it like to be in a bathtub without water? And you start opening up the mind to all of these wonderful creative experiences where unfortunately, I think we spend so much of our time closing down those experiences, telling people, our kids, people we work with, that we should do things in certain ways.
Very, very cool. So let's go from there and let's talk more about diversity of ideas here. And let's talk about building our core identity and MIT's Ezra Zuckerman on diversity.
So one of the things that allows us to make connections among resources is to have diverse experiences. And what some of Zuckerman's research shows is we've got to be careful, though. We want to make sure we strike a careful balance. So let's say you're looking for a job. If you have 5 or 6 very different jobs, your recruiters or your hiring manager is going to think, well, this person is so scattered. So what Zuckerman's work looks at, another work looks at, is establishing a core identity. He does this in the context of movies. And you don't want to have yourself doing too many things, too many different movies at once. But at the same time, you don't want to be typecast into only doing one movie, because then you're not outside of your comfort zone. You're not going to get other types of positions. You're not stretching yourself in new ways. So his research shows that some of the most effective movies come from these actors who are able to diversify their experiences after they establish a core identity. So you don't want to be typecasts, but you don't want to be too scattered to begin with. You want to incrementally diversify your experiences.
So I think a key point in there is your core identity is you have to know a certain amount of who I am or what my core competency is, and then challenge and stretch yourself out from there.
Right, because until you have that sense of identity, you don't know who you are. Other people don't know who you are. So try and do something well first, and then start experimenting with these different types of diverse experiences.
Awesome. So from there, I want to talk about the importance or even the detriment of moving, something that my wife and I were taking our whole business and we're moving, I guess, 500-600 miles away in a month, actually to a destination known, to a home unknown. And I know that shaking things up, as scary as it is certainly going to be the best for us.
Right. So we tend to not realize that when we put ourselves in these types of situations, we're able to meet new people and learn a lot about ourselves. So when we move, whether it be moving 500 miles like you, or moving jobs, or moving industries, or even moving around the block, we put ourselves in situations where we're going to just meet new people and have new types of experiences. And one of the things I talk about in Stretch is called the multi-context or multi-C rule. And it's the recognition that the more diverse experiences we have, the better results we get, because we can think about resources in different ways, whether we're drawing off of different types of experiences, different types of cultures, different types of jobs, and so on. But a lot of our bias in society is getting a depth of experience. And instead of investing our time trying to get new experiences, it's trying to get over and over again those experiences. That's that bias of expertise that we talked about. So moving is one way, but we don't even have to move to be able to get outside. We can create these experiences vicariously by go to a conference you would never otherwise go to. So you go into a different industry, or try and go have lunch with someone who does something completely different than you, and try and just learn about different types of people. And this gives you a way of learning also about yourself.
Awesome. Let's go from there. Let's talk about exercises to strengthen a stretch. And maybe you can tell us about your daughters and a Sleeping Beauty exercise.
So my daughters, of course, they're really curious as I'm writing the book, and they want to know how they can help. And I said, yeah, I think you can help, because I just read this interesting study that was published that shows that a lot of academic research goes dormant for decades, and no one knows about it. And you can go back and you can look at some of Einstein's work, and no one cited or used this work for many, many years until someone discovers it, and then all of a sudden it shapes important conversations. And I was thinking about that, and at the time they were reading the Disney story, Sleeping Beauty. And I'm like, there's an interesting connection here, because I think a lot of the resources that we have are really sleeping beauties. We don't realize that they're full of life and vitality, knowledge, nourishment, all sorts of things, and they're just hiding around there. So I was starting to talk to them, and I was familiar with the Sleeping Beauty story a little from having read it to them, but they wanted me to read the story, and we read the story together, and they said, oh, I really want to help out with the book. So I started asking them questions about the story and who the villain was and what the premise of the story was, and they were eagerly participating. And there is another great example of stretching is taking children who, at the time they were 3 and 8, who you would think would have no impact on writing a nonfiction book based off of social science on resourcefulness, and having them help me see that this story really is a great way of illuminating this important lesson that a lot of resources we have go dormant. So I thank them for helping me bring this to the reader.
Woohoo! From there, let's talk real briefly about the importance of taking a break and paying less attention.
So we think, and our bosses certainly think, that unless we're staring in front of a computer, we're not doing real work. And there was this joke when I first started working. Microsoft Windows was pretty popular, and it came with solitaire. And it would be, who's goofing off in their queue playing solitaire? And you'd, I caught you playing solitaire. You're a bad employee. Well, it actually turns out there's good insight there, because if you take a break and spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes every couple of hours doing something mindless, whether it be playing solitaire, going for a walk, coloring, or doodling, the mind is still working. It's making subconscious connections, but you don't realize it. It's thinking about your problem, it's thinking about your work, but it's doing so with the benefit of not being constrained by these tight cognitions that we get when we're so focused. So by doing something mindless, we free the brain to be more creative. So we actually are productive. So the boss might say, well, this isn't counting, you're goofing off. Well, you can say, you know what? The brain is still working. And in fact, I might argue the brain is actually more productive because it's more creative in making these connections.
Awesome. Let's go from there and we talked about planning earlier and how you want to step out and get started. But can you tell us what it means to plan backwards?
Yeah, so what I like to advise people is try and go out there, start the day without the plan. Don't say, I'm going to script out every single minute of the day. You're going to take out that spontaneity and improvisation that often creates your most rewarding experiences. And then at the end of the day, keep a diary and write exactly what you just did. It's your backwards-looking plan. Then compare it to how you would have spent the day and ask yourself, what did I gain, or maybe even what did you lose? And chances are you'll see that you're experiencing the world in more enjoyable ways, and you're still able to get things done.
Thank you. From there, how many years have you been newlyweds, and what's the power of a mid-year resolution?
Well, we've been newlyweds for going on 14 years now. We got married in 2003, and one of the things with New Year's resolutions are they're great because they spark us to action. But how many times do we say, let me just wait until New Year's until I could make this goal? Well, no, we can make a resolution any time of the year. And one of the resolutions that we make is we try and get in shape better, because one of our customs to renew our marriage and renew our lives is to get dressed in our original wedding clothes. And we celebrate our anniversary not with a very expensive gift, but we go out, we get dressed up as newlyweds. I remake her bouquet. She remakes my boutonniere.
So
we get
cool. Lots
of congratulations. People will come up to me in restaurants. I can't even count them on my fingers and say, do you know what you're getting into? And sometimes I'll play along and say, no, tell me, what is it like to be married? Or other times I'll let them in on what happens. And so this is great because, one, we replenish our relationship. We're newlyweds, even though we've been married for a really long time. But two, she wears that dress more than once. That's the ultimate stretch, because that was a pretty expensive dress, and she's worn it many, many times. But most importantly, what it does is it teaches us that our relationship isn't bound by time, and we can renew it any time of the year, whether it be our anniversary, whether it be New Year's, whether it be something else. Not to mention, it keeps us in great shape, because I'll tell you what, I don't want to be the person that year that says, you know what, I couldn't fit into the tux. This ritual is going kaput. So I don't know what's going to, we've been doing this now 13 years or so, and hopefully we can keep that up. But I know what's going to happen when we get in our 70s or 80s. We still fit in that outfit. So, more kudos to us, I'd say, if I can pat myself on the back.
That will be a woohoo!
Yes.
So I'd love to give our audience homework assignment so that they can actually take something away and do something with this interview. What one homework assignment would you give people today to begin to stretch?
So I'm going to stretch your question and do an A, B, and C then. So
Okay, go for it.
So number one, go around the house. Really simple. Just find an object that you use in one conventional way. Find 3 different unconventional ways of doing it. You'll realize it's not that hard to get into this mindset. 2, try and do something for a little less. Something that normally takes you a week, try and do it in 6 days. Try and you spend $200 for a kid's birthday party, try and spend $150. Try and just get into this mindset that realizes not only can you get the work done with less, you can actually do the work better because of less. And then finally, give yourself that pleasure of taking a break. Go for that 10-minute walk, do a little doodling, do something mindless. You'll realize it's a great way of not just replenishing, but still working in creative ways, even if they're subconscious.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Your second reason there, or your second homework assignment, it makes me think of this show, which is, well, until last week was a 7-day-a-week show for 560 shows in a row. Now it's down to 5, only 5 days a week, a book a day, 5 days a week. And what I found is the tighter constraints, it's Parkinson's law, the less time I give myself to get ready for the interview, the better the interview turns out. If I give myself unlimited time, I take unlimited resources and I twist my gut in 2. If I have limited time, I use my resources so much more effectively.
That's right. You're not trying to create that perfect plan. You're getting comfortable with acting, and the mind works better under those types of moderate constraints.
So with that said, what advice would you give people or parents to help their kids with constraints or learning how to stretch?
Well, so this is really important because your kids are always, and mine too, they're always asking, I want the latest toy, I want the latest gadget, or so-and-so has the iPhone, or whatever that might be. And we tend to teach our kids an unhealthy dependence that they need more to be satisfied and find well-being. Because every time we say yes to them, yes to the new thing, we're conditioning them. So my advice, as hard as this might seem at first, is get more comfortable saying no. Because not only do you unlink that dependence on having more to feel better, but you're also rekindling that natural stretchiness that kids all have, where they can see the frying pan in lots of different ways. But if you're always providing the perfect tool whenever they have a question, a problem, whether it be boredom or trying to entertain themselves, you're teaching them, this is exactly what I need to feel better. Whereas there's lots of different ways of feeling better. So saying no is by far my overarching advice. You don't want to say no all the time, but you want to say no probably a lot more than you are saying.
Very, very cool. From there, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
I love when I just get to sit down and chat with someone and tell them about some of these ideas, because it's so counterintuitive, and I can immediately see kind of, well, yeah, I really never thought about it that way, but as you're speaking, yeah, I mean, I would never go to my boss and say, give me one less person for my team or give me less budget. That seems like it would be the death knell for my career. And just to see that light bulb go off in their mind brings me such joy, because I've spent over a decade on this research and a couple of years writing this book. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is in academia, mostly for the worse, we tend to spend our times in very insular conversations, and we don't talk to outsiders. We don't follow a lot of the advice that I talk about in the book as academics. So I wanted to write this book not just to bring this message out there, but also to help stretch myself and have conversations, interact with people, which as an introvert was a little hard to do at first, and really stretch myself. And when I see someone realizing that, well, these ideas can help touch them, it can help their lives, that gives me tremendous joy.
Oh, I almost hate to ask this, because I don't want it to be what I call the disease of the more, but do you have a next stretch in mind for yourself?
Well, I mean, I like to tell people when they ask that question, it took me 5 years to have my second kid, so I take things one day at a time. So I think I'll stick with that answer.
Very, very good. So where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful book, Stretch?
Well, my book is wherever books are sold, and you can learn more about the book, and I've got some neat videos. I've got this stretch discussion guide that's actually a game. You download the kit and you turn it into a dice that you roll. All of that great information is at my website, which is simply www.scottsonenshein.com, and that's spelled SCOTTSONENSHEIN.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch that, come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to Scott as well. Scott, this has been truly fantastic, a joy, and I love how you are making people to stretch. Any last words of wisdom you want to leave people with today?
I want people to recognize that in most circumstances, they have all of the tools and abundance in front of them, even if sometimes it doesn't seem that way. If they can learn how to stretch, they can get more creative and more resourceful what they do have and make more with whatever they have to achieve the goals that are most meaningful and important to them.
Woohoo! So thank you so much, Scott. This has been a true joy. Everybody go out and get stretch and stretch yourself. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get stretch and unlock your power of less and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you. These are great questions. So you really read and took in the book. So thank you for doing that.
You took the decade to write this book. I could at least take the time to read the book and ask you the good questions.
Yeah, well, you sure did. So thank you, Michael.
Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend ahead, and may you stretch in all that you do.
Thank you. You too, Michael. And I'll give you a woohoo!
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!